Hello everyone. Today I would like to engage in a cultural study of the Scandinavian countries and their weird relationships to each other, more specifically Sweden and Finland. A little known fact is that they have this unspoken rivalry where they kind of hate each other.
You guys are just like Finnish people, right?
No, we're better. Much better. We're just better.
Would you date a Finnish guy?
No.
What's the difference between Sweden and Finland?
The Finnish people are ugly and they are talking an ugly language and they are pale, very, very pale.
If I think about Finnish women, I think about they look like men, don't they?
That makes it fun. You hook up and you don't know if she's a girl until days later.
Yeah, hen it's called in Sweden.
I heard you all wish that you were Finnish.
You heard very, very wrong, actually.
Norway is the annoying little brother, Denmark is the cool older brother, and Finland is the retarded cousin.
They're bleak and they're fat.
Why do Swedish men use more beauty products than Finnish women?
It doesn't matter how much beauty products you apply to Finnish women, they'll look ugly anyways.
Now we could get into the drawn out historical details of why this animosity might exist, but it would really be more honest to just describe it as a big high school instead. So unless anyone wants to object in the comment section, we're gonna move on. 2 years ago I made a video about Sweden entitled "The Feminist Government That Hates Women," where I gathered all kinds of terrible crime statistics relevant to our socialist feminist government. Think of the video you're watching right now as a follow-up. I've had followers with roots in Finland writing me saying that the country is now in uproar over its first cultural enrichment. A series of rape cases involving children has swept the country recently, largely thanks to immigration, and the public is now outraged. Of course, this isn't the first time that gang rapes have happened in Finland, but up until recently they've been relatively rare. This past year alone, sex crimes in Finland increased with nearly 15%. Over a quarter of all sex crime is now committed by non-citizens. And if you look at their capital specifically, sex crime increased with 48% generally and 70% for the category children. Now keep in mind that these numbers don't account for ethnicity, only citizenship. So the actual number of rapists with a migrant background could be way higher. Whenever you look up other studies from Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden, it's all the same pattern. Non-Europeans from primarily Muslim countries stand out and are severely overrepresented. In the past year alone, the city of Oulu has seen 11 cases of migrant grooming gangs, similar to the Rotterdam scandal in England. All of the victims were underage, and one even ended up killing herself due to the trauma. This is of course highly worrying, since Finland has been relatively spared from multiculturalism up until recently. Unlike Sweden, where I reside, where we've fully embraced it for the past decades. Understandably, this has angered a lot of Finns who feel that their politicians allowed this to happen despite their warnings. Because for some reason, Finnish politicians and Finnish media think of Sweden as a role model, not a meme. Now, a lot of people think of the Scandinavian countries as one big happy socialist family. Except none of them are really socialist, and it's more like a pretentious dysfunctional family where everyone just tries to one-up each other via projecting success and seeking affirmation from the patriarch, which in this case, so ironically, is Sweden. Daddy, daddy, daddy! And that's something I wanted to address in this video, because as a Swedish citizen, used to a Swedish standard, I get pretty surprised reading the news coming out of Finland. Take for example this case, where police say they were informed about the alleged crimes that took place that day, which resulted in immediate action. The 3 men in question were arrested right away. That's so cool! Someone actually got arrested? I mean, that's a privilege in Sweden nowadays. Not even if you're a woman getting beat up, or a rape victim. Can you count on the cops actually showing up and arresting someone? Lots of sad stories in the video description. As a reaction to the sex crimes sweeping the country, the Interior Minister suggested immigrants committing serious crimes have their citizens stripped away, and that those with residence permits make an obligation to Finnish values. He's quoted saying, "You can't come to Finland seeking protection and security and then take that away from other people yourself." I think I want to bang this guy. Oh no, wait, that's just my Swedish culture talking. Sorry. But this kind of political machismo simply doesn't exist among Swedish politicians. Symbolic or not. Whether or not something actually is gonna happen here remains to be seen. Politicians promise stuff all the time, so only action is worth paying attention to. But if you throw a starving man a dry old cracker, he's gonna think it's the tastiest thing in the world. That is the attitude I have been forced to settle with due to Swedish politicians. Which absolutely ruins my judgment and isn't a good measurement of quality. It only took a bit of further googling to discover that their prime minister got lots of critique for not taking this seriously enough to begin with, despite several rape cases. He even denied to hold a parliament meeting at first, but then even more rapes happened, which forced him to address it, possibly due to the upcoming election. And the changes they've implemented are so weak that they come off as Swedish legislation. They're only going to consider revoking citizenships for rapists. Their justice minister expressed caution on the issue, and when media outlets say Finland toughened the laws on rape, it refers to things like making sex without consent count as rape. Even though that's the very definition of rape. And let's not forget their toughening sentences for sexual abuse of children from 4 years in prison to 6 years in prison. How the hell can you have a 6-year maximum sentence for one of the most horrible crimes in the world? Oh wait, you don't, because it's actually 4 years in Finland. And if you increase it to 6 years max, that's still luxury compared to where these migrants are coming from. So expect to see a whole lot more rape in your future there, Finland. Clearly, if we want to compare these two countries, things aren't black and white. But there is one aspect I definitely am envious of as a Swedish citizen, namely the fact that Finland even had a meeting in parliament about this. Due to their democratic policy stating that if a petition gets 50,000 signatures, parliament are forced to address the issue. Whereas feminist Sweden, on the other hand, has allowed its sex crime to skyrocket for years on end without as little as a meeting. Our establishment doesn't even want to acknowledge that this is a completely imported rape crisis. The mainstream media came out saying that 58% of our rapes the past years have been done by migrants, and Sweden still hasn't made it mandatory to report criminals, still hasn't decreased the amount of migrants they're taking, despite wanting everyone to think otherwise, still haven't kicked out the men pretending to be children, even though their particular ethnic group is specifically overrepresented with gang rape. So putting them together with young girls in schools might not be the best idea. Sweden still hasn't made any effort to prevent outbreaks of imported disease, given that there's no mandatory health testing of refugees. And Sweden is still talking about how ISIS rapists need therapy. They have to be given an opportunity to return into Swedish society because they belong there, according to multiculturalism. One of the most absurd news stories I've read in the past years is how Stockholm shut down an intensive care unit for rape victims in order to give that therapy to refugees instead. Even though it's the refugees who've radically increased the number of sex crimes since they arrived here. So that's a very odd priority from a feminist government. In fact, thanks to our feminist socialist government, fewer rape victims hear back from police. Police were essentially instructed to drop rape cases so they can focus on chasing stoners and traffic violations instead, because that will make the crime clearance statistics look better, which is important if you want to get re-elected. So make sure to thank the Social Democrats for that. Finland also has better healthcare than Sweden, twice as much patient capacity, while Sweden lets cancer patients die from waiting times alone. Finland also has stricter work culture. They don't allow hospital staff to leave just because their dog has diarrhea. And compared to Sweden, they're generally safer. They have a more efficient justice system, fewer ghettos, less pollution, higher literacy rate, and higher trust among citizens. Whereas Sweden has the lowest police density the country has seen in 10 years, and a police crisis that's embarrassing considering the public image they try to project. I'm not saying that Finland doesn't have issues. I know that you do. But correct me if I'm wrong, aren't most of those issues a result of you trying to copy Sweden? Much like Sweden, abusing nearly a dozen children sexually will only land you 5 years in a nice prison hotel. As with this Finnish case, there was also another case where a man raped a 10-year-old, but when the prosecutor asked for a toughened sentence on behalf of the victim, the Finnish judge refused and ruled that the kid asked for it, okay? The kid asked for it, okay? It looked like the 10-year-old wanted it. They wanted it. The kid asked for it. So that's pretty fucking creepy. Seems like Finland is in this weird position where they have things going pretty well. They're even doing some things better than Sweden, and yet they want to imitate Sweden because their establishment thinks it's trendy. This is like the stupidest idea imaginable. Look at our rape statistics. Look at our massive integration issues. Realize that if you're not willing to push off political correctness, you're gonna become Sweden in just a few decades. Do you want that, Jarmo? All this talk about how Finland has good welfare and high social trust and a very good infrastructure. That's what they used to say about Sweden before mass immigration and the multicultural experiment. Sweden now is experiencing tons of issues, while Finland has the happiest immigrants in the world. If you want to keep it that way, then don't listen to any of your progressive media. There's a debate taking place right now on how, due to low birth numbers, Finland needs to accept mass immigration for the sake of the economy. While living in Sweden, I've heard that argument many times before from our politicians as motivation for these insane policies. Look how that turned out. Sweden's population has increased with nearly 2 million thanks to immigration. Did our economy become better because of that? No. Instead, welfare is becoming dismantled and migrants are so poorly educated their unemployment levels is keeping back wage development for all workers in the country. In the beginning of the 90s, Sweden had only 3 ghettos in the entire country. Today we have almost 200 exclusion areas, and several of these allow criminals to exercise more authority and respect from the locals than Swedish police. They say immigration from third world countries is profitable, but mention nothing of the social costs from lesser cultures. Increased rape, increased crime, increased uncertainty. Assimilation can only happen with low-level immigration, and even then it might take generations. So why don't you just come up with a better financial model instead? Maybe your country's economy shouldn't depend on expanding forever and eventually becoming 50 million people. And even then, countries like Poland and Hungary are trying better methods to raise birth numbers, so why not take after them instead of Sweden? A famous Finnish comedian was interviewed for this article on how Finland does things better than Sweden and said, quote, "I don't want to be misinterpreted, but we're an ethnically homogenous people, which makes our trust levels high." End of quote. If there's anything Finnish people need to understand, it's that this is the key to your country's prosperity. The irony of ethno-nationalism is that it's not needed so long as you maintain the ethnic majority. Since people are pack animals, they will only become excessively tribal when they feel outnumbered or threatened for various reasons. And when you actually do some deep research into what it means to be a refugee, you'll understand that real help comes from helping other countries rebuild their infrastructure, and not importing 1% of their population and ignoring the majority that's left behind in the conflict area where the most help is needed. Sweden's budget for immigration could help all the refugees in the entire world, but instead they decided to help the ones that could afford moving to Sweden. That's, I'm not sure that's humanitarianism or successful, but Finnish media really is trying to make Finland more like Sweden, publishing bullshit articles that don't reflect the interest of most people living there. Take this one article about the Ulu rapes and you'll find the same old argument. I've heard this so many times as a Swedish citizen. Quote, "Let's not forget that Finnish men rape too." You think anyone forgot? We already know that white men rape too. That's exactly why you don't need more rape in your country. See, you're wording this all wrong. The question that you are supposed to answer here, if you expect to be taken seriously by the Finnish people, is why does Finland need more rape? Just asking. You like the idea of the multicultural, progressive, liberal society, but how many underage rape victims is it worth? Then you look at this other article from a Swede's perspective living in Finland. "I feel like a foreigner in my own country." End of quote. The article then goes on to detail how some Swedish people are afraid to speak Swedish on the bus due to fear of being criticized. Oh, how Swedish. Quote, "A Swedish man tells of a situation on the subway where the Swedish language was criticized harshly and he felt like saying something, but he didn't didn't. Well, sounds like you didn't assimilate very well there, Sven. A young Finnish couple sitting across from me were discussing the reason why they have to learn Swedish, and they actually concluded it's because Finnish Swedes want to maintain privileged positions in society. Now, this wasn't aimed at me as a person, but I do wonder if it's discrimination anyway, and so I couldn't help but to take it personally. So, something that a lot of people don't know is that learning Swedish is mandatory in Finland, even though it's not used in day-to-day life. The Swedish language is not relevant to the majority of the population, so that Finnish couple aren't as crazy as they sound. It really does seem like the only reason Swedish is being taught in Finland is to make life more comfortable for that very small minority of Swedes. And that kind of pisses me off. I had to learn Swedish when my family came here because of the war in the 90s, so why don't you do the same when you move to someone else's country? It sounds kind of spoiled to me. Essentially, this could be compared to forcing the entire population of Sweden to learn Arabic just because there's a minority that's using it. No Swedish person would like that, and yet they expect other countries to serve their utmost whim. Really says something about the national character, huh? You already ruined your own country by being a metropolitan anxiety syndrome, so why do you have to take your SJW shenanigans to other countries? Oh! If you consider this to be harassment, then why don't you just buy a tampon, Sven? If you really like diversity so much, you would be happy about the fact that not every country worships whiny minorities. And especially not ones that ruined their own country with the same PC mentality. So it is problematic that the Finnish media is feeding that narrative, because these kind of articles don't reflect the interest of the majority of the population, just like in Sweden. That's where our problems really came from. Progressive globalists would rather play activists than journalists, and these cowardly politicians that listen to them, rather than their own voters. If Sweden were a person, it would be the kind of sassy basic bitch that smokes weed to impress guys and is way too easy to talk into anal. So cosmopolitan, the only feelings she knows is insecurity and resentment and bitterness arising from that insecurity. Whereas Finland is that cute autistic girl who doesn't understand how hot she is. There's a huge difference between surface and reality, okay? Sweden is known for being tolerant and progressive, but in reality, only 31% of Swedes said they would accept a refugee in their own house. And then when they actually got the offer, only 2% actually accepted. Only 1% of Swedish politicians live in a migrant neighborhood, and the majority of media lives in a trendy inner city where everyone is trendy, leftist, and white. Research shows it only takes 4% non-white people to move into a neighborhood for Swedes to start moving out. Swedish mothers were interviewed on diversity, and they all spoke very highly of multiculturalism. But then when given the option, they still chose to live in white areas and avoid immigrant-heavy schools. In fact, a recent poll showed that as much as 40% of Swedes don't even know a single non-white immigrant. It's fake, okay? The Sweden image is fake! So don't take after it. The numbers are out there, so look this up for yourself. Don't do what the Swedish people are doing. Don't allow your country to descend into this absurd reality show that the rest of the world starts laughing at.
Jeg kunne forstå, at der var et vidne, der havde set gerningsmanden flygte.
Gerningspersonen.
Gerningspersonen? Nej, nu stopper I sgu det svenskerpis der. På dansk, der havde en gerningsmand.
Finland's shitty self-esteem is an interesting phenomenon. You'll find it mentioned by those who deal in culture. Even the guy who invented the Good Country Index said about Finland, "It's sad. They have so much to be proud of, but they spend way too much time comparing themselves to Sweden. It's pathological, almost." End of quote. I thought you people could handle your alcohol. I really did. All this talk about Finnish people and their drinking. You'd think they'd develop a tolerance sooner or later. But no, instead they just drank themselves retarded, then took a look at the special needs kids of the class called Sweden, and decided that's their role model. Look, just Don't dye your hair blonde, okay? I like your dark hair. It suits you. Might not be in everyone's taste, but I like you as you are. I'm just saying, Sweden's been stuck with a feminist government that's importing rape. If there's anything I've learned living in this country, it's that people's actions matter way more than their words. So if you are to judge according to actions and not words, it would appear that feminism is about hating women. So please, Finland, don't try feminism or multiculturalism. It's a trap. The trick to real equality is caring so little about gender and race that you end up treating everyone the same. So you, as citizens, have a responsibility to challenge your politicians and journalists when they try to take you in Sweden's direction. There is a clear warning example in place already, with plenty of data to assume from to conclude that this is not a good idea. So just look in the video description and use those sources when you write your politicians and your media. Use them in your political debates in day-to-day life. Save them on your phone and use screenshots. Let them know when they're not representing the common people. Let them know that they're about to lose that people's votes. So spread that knowledge and save your country. Unless you want to become Sweden, Finland.
But she's so nice, but she's so nice, but she's so nice. But she's so nice, but she's so nice, but she's so nice.